It's 1:19 in the morning. The South China Sea is black below. The cabin is quiet. Most of the 239 people on board are asleep. Some are thinking about whoever is waiting for them in Beijing. A few are watching movies on the little screens in the seat backs in front of them. That pale blue glow, the only light in the cabin. A Chinese calligraphy artist named Chen Yongyi is probably thinking about the exhibition he is flying home to prepare. A young couple from France named Adrien and Laurence Watrelot are somewhere in the cabin with their teenage son. A Malaysian IBM executive named Philip Wood is in seat 50J, heading back to Beijing, probably already asleep. The last words to leave that aircraft are about as ordinary as it gets. Good night, Malaysian 370. 2 minutes later, the plane is gone. Not the way planes go down in bad weather or after an engine gives out. Not the kind of gone that leaves wreckage in a story you can follow. It just disappears. Like someone reached down from some impossible height, picked up a 200-ton aircraft, and lifted it clean out of the world. March 8th, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, and 12 years later, nobody knows what happened. This is still unexplained. Brief explorations of unsolved mysteries. My name is Mark. MH370 was a red-eye, a routine overnight run from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The kind of flight this crew has made a dozen times. The Boeing 777 was in good shape. Maintenance records were clean. The pilots were experienced. Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah was 53 years old, 18,000 hours in the air. The kind of pilot the other pilots looked up to. His first officer, Farid Abdul Hamid, was 27. Relatively new to the 777, but by all accounts, a solid pilot. A few weeks from his type rating check ride. The kind of crew you wanted up front. Take off at 12:41 in the morning. 40 minutes in, everything normal. The ACAR system, which sends routine automated health data from the plane to the ground, made its last transmission without flagging a single problem. No mechanical alerts, no pressure warnings, nothing. Then those final words. Good night, Malaysian 370. Calm. Professional. The kind of thing you say 100 times a year before switching over to the next air traffic controller. The flight was transitioning from Malaysian airspace into Vietnamese airspace. Ho Chi Minh City center was waiting on the other side. They never heard from the plane. At 1:21 in the morning, the Mode S transponder, the device that tells radar systems who you are and how high you're flying, went dark. Not because of a crash. Not because of anything that showed up in the maintenance records before or after. It just stopped. And the controllers in Kuala Lumpur did not immediately notice. And the controllers in Ho Chi Minh did not immediately notice. By the time anyone thought something was genuinely wrong, the aircraft had already gone somewhere nobody expected. Malaysian military radar, the kind that does not depend on the plane talking back, kept tracking a blip after the transponder shut off. The operators did not scramble anything because it read as a friendly aircraft. Nothing alarming in the moment. But when investigators pulled those records days later, what they found changed everything about this case. That blip made a sharp, deliberate turn. Not a gradual drift. Not the heading change you get from turbulence or a hypoxic crew fumbling at the controls. A calculated, planned turn. The aircraft flew back across the Malay Peninsula, retracing familiar airspace. Turned south at Penang Island and headed northwest towards the Andaman Sea. This was not a plane in crisis. Planes that lose pressure or power do not execute sharp, calculated course changes. They do not retrace known navigation routes. They do not stay airborne. MH370 stayed in the air, for 7 more hours. Here's how we know that, because this is where the case gets generally strange. Inmarsat, a British satellite communications company, reconstructed an approximate flight path from something called BTO and BFO data. Burst timing offset, burst frequency offset. Essentially, automated electronic handshakes between an aircraft satellite data unit and a geostationary satellite parked 22,000 miles overhead. The plane was not transmitting voice or flight data, but it was alive enough to keep pinging the satellite, the way your phone pings a cell tower even when all your apps are closed. Inmarsat's engineers measured the timing and the Doppler shift of each ping, and from those numbers, they could place the aircraft on one of 2 arcs, a northern corridor or a southern corridor. The northern corridor would have taken the plane over China, India, Pakistan, countries with robust air defenses that almost certainly would have tracked it. So investigators focused on the southern arc and the final ping. What became known as the 7th arc placed the plane somewhere over the southern Indian Ocean around 8:19 in the morning, roughly when the fuel would have run out. That is where we know the plane ended, somewhere along a curving line drawn across the most remote ocean on Earth. We just do not know where on that line. Now here's the detail that stopped me cold. A researcher named Jean-Luc Marchand, a retired commercial pilot, analyzed a recording from the Malaysian air traffic control radar system, a dataset called Caption. What he found was not chaos in a cockpit, not a struggle, not a plane in distress. He found silence, precision, calm. At the exact moment the transponder was switched off, the data showed no unusual inputs on the control column. The autopilot was flying the plane, and someone in that cockpit, at 35,000 feet over the South China Sea, calmly rotated the transponder knob through each position, one step at a time, until it rested on standby. That is not a system failing. That is a system being deliberately put to sleep. And then there is the flight simulator. Captain Zahari owned a home flight simulator. Advanced, detailed, the kind serious pilots build to stay sharp. When investigators examined it after the disappearance, they found 7 manually programmed waypoints buried in the data. Coordinates that do not appear on any standard aviation chart, saved in a file that had been created automatically when the computer sat idle for more than 15 minutes. The kind of file a lot of people would not think to delete. When those 7 points were connected on a map, they traced a path from Kuala Lumpur through the Andaman Sea and deep into the southern Indian Ocean. The same ocean where the Inmarsat pings said the plane ended. The Malaysian police and the Australian Federal Police both examined the simulator. They both noted the coordinates. Neither one called it conclusive. So here is where it splits. The theory most investigators have quietly settled on, though very few will say it in formal documents, is deliberate action by someone in the cockpit. The evidence points that direction. The calm sequential transponder shutdown, the calculated turn back across familiar airspace along routes a veteran pilot would know by memory, the simulator data, the 7-hour controlled flight south towards the most remote and least surveilled water on the planet. The investigation into Captain Zahari found no confirmed motive. His marriage had been reportedly strained. His psychological profile was not flagged. His record was spotless. A colleague told reporters that he was thoughtful, curious, generous, the kind of person who builds a home flight simulator because he actually loves to fly. And not just as a career. His daughter later made a public statement defending her father. The simulator evidence, as investigators carefully noted, is not a smoking gun. Files can be deleted. Files can also just be old, saved over months of recreational flying and never cleared out. What we know for certain is that those waypoints were there. What nobody can say for certain is what they mean, or who put them there, or when. The theory holds not because the evidence is airtight. It holds because every other explanation leaves a harder question on the table. Now, if you want a rational answer that does not require intent, here's the best option available. A catastrophic decompression event, rapid depressurization in the cargo hold or the cockpit, could have incapacitated the crew before they had time to react. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau built a significant portion of their initial search strategy around this scenario, what they called the hypoxia ghost flight theory. In this version, the plane flew itself. Autopilot engaged, crew unconscious or dead, the aircraft continuing on its last program heading until the fuel exhausted and the engines flamed out. A ghost flight over 3,000 miles, nearly 5,000 kilometers of empty ocean. It's not without precedent. There have been other flights where decompression incapacitated the crew and the plane flew until it ran out of fuel. Payne Stewart's Learjet in 1999 is the most well-known case. The principle is established. The problem is the caption data. If the cabin lost pressure and the crew went down within seconds of the transponder shutting off, who turned the transponder off? Who executed the turn across the peninsula? Who flew the specific, deliberate route that military radar recorded? The ghost flight theory requires the aircraft system to have failed spontaneously in a very specific sequence. The radar data said they did not fail spontaneously. They were switched. And that's the part that closes off the most comfortable explanation. But here's where the official count runs into a wall. The high probability search zone around the 7th arc has been searched exhaustively. Over 140,000 square kilometers, roughly 54,000 square miles, mapped by the Australian-led search, and then again by Ocean Infinity, a deep-sea exploration company using some of the most advanced autonomous underwater vehicles ever built. Their most recent efforts, in early 2026, covered additional areas based on updated drift modeling of the confirmed debris that had washed ashore. Wing flaperon pieces on Madagascar and Reunion Island, seat cushions, interior panels, all of it consistent with MH370. None of it pointing to a precise crash site. The ocean gave up those fragments and nothing more. The absence of wreckage in the expected location has led some researchers to propose what aviation journalist Jeff Wise called a controlled glide scenario. The idea that whoever was at the controls at fuel exhaustion did not simply let the aircraft plunge when the engine stopped, but glided it. A Boeing 777 at altitude with no engine power can glide roughly 12 to 15 miles, 19 to 24 kilometers for every 1,000 feet of altitude. That is a significant distance, enough to put the aircraft down well beyond the primary search zone, in water that has never been mapped with the resolution needed to find wreckage, in the deepest, most inaccessible stretch of the Indian Ocean basin. That's a hard thing to sit with, because it implies a level of sustained calculation from the moment the transponder went dark to the final moments of the flight that most people would rather not think about too carefully. And then there is the version of this story that almost nobody in official circles will touch. Richard Godfrey, an independent researcher and retired aerospace engineer, spent years applying a technology called WSPR, which stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, a global network of low-power amateur radio transmitters, to track what he believed were disturbances in those signals caused by a large aircraft passing through them. He plotted a specific crash site, 33.2 degrees south, 95.3 degrees east, in deep water, well north of the primary search zone. Now, the scientific community's response was not gentle. Researchers at the University of Adelaide and the Australian Defence Science and Technology Group published a detailed critique concluding that the underlying physics were fundamentally flawed. They argued WSPR was never designed for aircraft tracking, that the signals are too weak and too noisy, and distinguishing a Boeing 77 from atmospheric noise requires assumptions you simply cannot support with current science. Some critics compared it to finding shapes in the clouds. Godfrey disagrees. The exchange has continued in research papers and public forums for years. I cannot tell you who is right. What I can tell you is that independent researchers are still actively working this case more than a decade later. That tells you something about how incomplete the official resolution really is. Somewhere between those two readings is where this case actually lives. And I'll be honest, I went back and forth on whether to include this last part. But I think it needs to be said. A small number of researchers and some of the families of the 239 passengers have raised a possibility that something happened to this aircraft that we do not have a complete framework for. That the speed and the precision of the disappearance, the near total communications blackout, the deliberate routing, the 7 hours of controlled flight, exceeds what a single person operating alone could have executed in that window of time without some kind of outside coordination. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but I am saying the case is strange enough, and the official investigation incomplete enough, that the question does not feel irresponsible to ask. The final report did not name a perpetrator. It did not confirm a motive. It concluded that the diversion likely resulted from, and I'm quoting here, manual inputs by a person or persons on the aircraft, and then it stopped, because the evidence stopped. It's 1:19 in the morning. A pilot says goodnight. A transponder goes dark. A plane turns south towards the deepest water on Earth. Grace Nathan walked down the aisle at her wedding in 2020 with a photograph of her mother tucked inside her bouquet of daisies. She still speaks of her mother in the present tense. She gives interviews. She advocates. She refuses to let this become a cold case buried under newer disasters. In northern China, a farmer named Li Ero has written more than 2,000 poems to a son who has never come home. He imagines him on an island somewhere, like Robinson Crusoe. He says the poems are how he keeps his son alive. Those two people are not anomalies. There are 239 families living inside that question. 12 years of not knowing whether to grieve or to wait. In response to MH370, the aviation authorities now require new commercial aircraft to broadcast their position automatically every minute when in distress, and every 15 minutes under normal conditions. A global safety standard rewritten around one vanishing. The world changed the rules, and the plane is still not found. I keep coming back to that transponder. Someone turned it off, step by step, calmly, while the autopilot flew. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. And then all of that knowledge, all of that intention disappeared into 54,000 square miles of water that has not given anything back. Not the aircraft, not the flight recorders, not the people. I don't know what happened at MH370. Nobody does. And I think that's the part of this case that earns its place in the mystery. Not the drama of the disappearance, though that is dramatic enough. But it's the quiet, sustained possibility of the silence that followed. The way something that large, something that loud, something carrying that many lives could simply be gone. I don't have a clean ending for you on this one, guys. Because there isn't one. Still Unexplained is created and hosted by me, Mark Evanoff. You can find the show and episode previews at www.stillunexplained.com. Please follow wherever you listen, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who would appreciate it. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.